How's DevCon so far? Having a good time? Awesome. I must be honest, over the years I've watched the pictures and the videos of DevCons and I haven't been a developer for the longest time, so I never really had a reason to come. And this year when I had the opportunity, applied for a talk, so super excited. It's my very first DevCon, so please be nice. Anybody else first time? Okay, awesome, cool. So I'm not alone. That's great to hear. But my name is Renier. I'm an entrepreneur. My coding started in school, but it also pretty much ended in school. So I did computer science. Anybody here Turbo Pascal at school? Yeah, I see Jacques is here. We actually went to school together. Jacques is now probably one of the best developers in the country, but I used to be better at him at Turbo Pascal at school. So I'll just remind him of that. But so good to see Jacques, and all of you. So today I'm going to talk about product as a bug until users pay. It's going to be a journey through stories and comic strips, and you'll understand why in a moment. Just a bit of context about myself and just to frame the conversation. Out of university, studied engineering, started a software company, an agency, and we were one of the first agencies in South Africa to build mobile apps for iPhone, iOS. We eventually expanded to build mobile apps across all platforms, J2ME, Windows Phone. Anybody old enough to remember how hard it was to build apps for those phones? We built all of them, eventually sold that agency in 2017, and then for the last few years, or after that, did a bit of consulting, worked a lot with early stage startups, which is a big passion of mine, early stage tech startups, and about 3.5 years ago, started a tech media business. So when I worked in tech as a younger person, I always had this desire to see tech media in South Africa be written by people who understand tech and understand business. And after 17 odd years, started to scratch my own itch and launched a company called The Open Letter, which is a daily email newsletter where we talk about cool things people are building in South Africa. Out of that, we also launched a comic strip series. When GPT Image 2 launched, I don't know if anybody watched the launch, but they kept flexing how good it does comic strips. And being a massive Silicon Valley fan, always laughing the series, always laughing at some of the crazy stuff that happens in startups in South Africa, we launched our own comic strip called South of Series A. So you can go check that out, southofseriesa.com. And the reason I tell you is I've specifically created cartoon strips or comic strips to help tell the story today. So I didn't feel like Dev by PowerPoint. I felt let's do some comic strips and kind of get a bit of the emotion in. So if you see comic strips, please give me a pity laugh or two. It's quite hard to stand here and you think it's funny and nobody else does. So I'm joking. You can do with it whatever you want. So this setup is typically something that has happened to most people who've ever had an idea that you pitch to people with a lot of enthusiasm, but then when it gets to a point of asking them to pay, it gets awkward. Right? So you pitch the idea, they love it, this is a great idea, and as soon as you go, hey, will you pay 1,000 Rand deposit for this? Then it becomes awkward and you get blue ticks. Happened to anybody here before? Okay, cool. We've all gone down that rabbit hole. This specific thing happened to me about 8 years ago. So 4i, the company that I had, the agency that was building software, we had some of the best people in the country that could build mobile apps, that could do design, fantastic product people. We had a bit of extra capacity and we decided we're going to build an idea that I had with a friend that I got over a braai, where all good app ideas start. Hey, I've got an app idea turned into this concept of let's help charities find people to come and do voluntary work for them. Okay, now off the cuff, everybody go, oh, that's cool. Charities can get people to come and work for them. That's great. I'm sure charities need people, so that's a good idea. So without any customer validation, without any other things, it just felt good to be building this app, which was called Helping Out. So we built the Android and iOS app, and we tried to launch it, and we couldn't launch it at all. In fact, all the charities that told us this was a good idea they weren't even keen to pilot it. Turns out people don't randomly sign up to volunteer at random places of people they don't know. That's not how these things work. So learned this lesson early on that, back then it was quite expensive. Like these days, build something with AI, you can test quickly and you get a no. But back then, this was a 300,000-400,000 Rand exercise to get to that point. So wasted a lot of money. And this is a lesson that I learned, which is kind of the basis of this talk, is like, how do we design and go about product development where getting users to pay is actually the primary objective of what we do, so that we can validate and stop wasting time and money. All right, so product is a bug until users pay. We're going to unpack it a bit more in a moment, but money really is a store of value. So if I say pay, I do understand some people work on open source projects. Some people work large enterprise solutions where necessary, what are you building right now? The feature, the function that you're building isn't necessarily going to result in someone paying right now. But this idea of paying really comes, what it comes down to is the fact that when someone values something, they typically prepare to pay for something. Now, if we go back to where money began, right? So money began, centuries ago, and the premise of it was simply, if I am in agriculture and I farm and I have seasonal produce, right? Let's say I have grain that that I harvest once a year. Now, obviously, I have a lot of produce. I want to be able to get rid of that produce and then have something that stores value that 3 months later, when it's not grain season, I can take that stored value and buy something else to stay alive, right? So that's pretty much why there was a need for money, right? So if you go to a store and there's something there of value for you, if you feel like it's going to taste good, if it's going to be healthy for you, if it's going to nourish you, or this product's going to make your life better, you pay for it, but actually what you're saying is, I agree with the value exchange that's taking place for me when I purchase this product. Okay, so when we say when users pay, it's actually when users get value. All right. So, very first iOS app that we built, this was on iOS 2.3. The App Store just launched. I think it had 230 apps when it launched, and there was a gold rush. Everybody wanted to build apps. We, at the time, were actually a web development house, but we needed customers. So someone came to us and said, hey, can you build an iPhone app for us? To which we obviously said yes, only realizing an hour later that you actually need a MacBook to develop an iPhone app, which is quite funny. So we actually ended up taking all the money we made on the project to buy the MacBook to build the project. But those were the early days, and there were good lessons learned. But we built this first iPhone app, actually ended up building the back end, everything, and it was one of the very first transacting apps, iOS apps in South Africa. So people could buy prepaid electricity using an iPhone app. The app was called PowerTime. I think they're still running today. But that's an app we built on iOS 2.3. And it was a massive success. It worked very well. It was slick. It was a way better experience than driving to Spar to go and buy an electricity voucher at 2 a.m. in the morning. Like, users really loved the app, and it added a lot of value. And as a naive young 20-year-old, we felt we made it. Look at these beautiful apps we're building. We are incredibly good at building apps. But that wasn't the truth. If you look at this comic strip, it kind of explains the story. The person who built the app actually came from that industry. So he worked in a company that made prepaid electricity meters. That's the first thing. So he knew how the vending system worked, right? The second thing is he was actually a user. So he had a prepaid electricity meter in his house, and he has faced the frustration and the pain of 2 a.m. running out of electricity. So he had a lot of proximity to this specific problem. Shortly after that, we did 2 other projects. The next one was actually the one directly after that. Someone saw the PowerTime app. They're like, wow, you guys can build mobile apps. I've got this idea for a mindfulness app. And the mindfulness app basically is, as you're done meditating for the day, you can fill out what your emotions are like, and then it keeps track of that. Kind of build a diary of how you're going on this journey of mindfulness and meditation. The reality is no one in our team did any of this stuff. No one worked in that industry. No one had an idea what this was about. So we literally took instructions from the person who had the idea and tried to build it. That app didn't work. It failed. And, once again, being naive, we just wrote it off. Some apps fail, some don't. Right? We all speak that way. Some startups work, some don't. This one just didn't work. So the analysis of what the actual problem wasn't that we didn't have proximity or understand what was going on. We just felt, it's one of those things. Not all apps work. Shortly after, we had the opportunity to work with Takealot, Takealot.com, just after Kim Reed and Consortium bought out Take-Two. Anybody remember Take-Two? It used to be called Take-Two. And they sold 2 products, by the way, DVDs and books. So Take-Two was buy a DVD and a book. So Kim Reed bought Take-Two, they rebranded it as Takealot, And we had the opportunity to develop Takealot's first iOS and Android apps. And I remember as we were building the app and we were busy testing, and we had Kim Reed, the CEO, in our office, and we were testing the app. Kim Reed came over to me and he said, "Renier, I can see that you guys are really good at building apps, but you really don't understand e-commerce." Okay, so we had Elasticsearch and we had all the stuff that an e-commerce app needed, but the checkout just wasn't great. And to be honest, at that time, we weren't e-commerce maxis. We weren't buying things on Takealot every other week, so we couldn't pick up the frustrations that a normal e-commerce user would pick up in order to make the experience better. So this is kind of like the conversation I had with Kim. We had fantastic tech, and he just said, "You know what, you guys get apps, but you just don't get procurement." So 3 stories, not dissimilar from actually what I experienced this year when I started vibe coding. So I mentioned it's my first DevCon. I'm now confident to come every year because I am now a coder, albeit a vibe coder. Is that okay? Is anybody judging me? Is that fine? Okay, cool. I might come speak to you soon when I need help scaling it. So in the beginning of the year, I started thinking, okay, let me check this thing out. I haven't coded for quite some time, but I've been involved in product development. Let me see what we can do. And I started thinking about some of the stuff we do in the open letter. What are the products or services, SaaS products that we use that I dislike the most? Okay, it causes me the most pain, and then costs me money. So I was saying, can I maybe save money? And can I do something that's better? So the first thing that came to mind for me was tickets. So we used to do tickets for our events. We do 6 events a year. And we used to do our tickets through a platform that all of you bought tickets for this event. And the platform was just really annoying in terms of its limitations, in terms of a lot of different things we wanted to do in an event experience. So I took it upon myself to build a ticketing app, which we then built, we launched. It's now our official ticketing app. I've got 2 other partners that are onboarding now. They're also going to use it as their ticketing app. So it was a frustration of something that I understood really well, because I've ran events before. I've seen someone standing at the door, searching their email, not finding the ticket. So I could go send the ticket before the event starts, an hour before the event, stuff like that. So we've done events before, we've got proximity. Same with our founder community. We've got a founder community called the Founder Collab. We used to use Circle, which is a community platform, SaaS platform, pay 2,000 Rand a month for Circle, for Circle. And I thought, well, Circle isn't great. I think we can build something better. We built it. It's working really well. We've doubled our ARR since introducing our own platform, which we built, so that works. And then we're also building some other stuff. But then in this process of vibe coding, I thought, no, but this is easy. We can build all kinds of products. And I fell back into the trap of my first story. I have an app idea. Okay? And my app idea was that when we write our newsletters, it's often really difficult to get quotes from people that are industry experts. And in America, they've got this platform called Haro. Anybody heard of Haro? Help a reporter out. So what it does is, as a journalist, you can go on there and say what you're going to write about. And in that process, they then take that and apply a bit of AI, and they email it to experts who can then reply, and you can quote them in your articles that you write. And South Africa didn't really have anything like this. And I spent, 2 weekends and a few evenings of family time building this thing out. And as I was about to launch it, I'm like, I'm actually not a journalist. I know nothing about this process of getting quotes from people. And then I had 2 options: can the project, or get a journalist to come and sit right next to me and hand it over to them and go, well, you can now code it because you know how this works, right? And the problem is that wasn't feasible. So I ended up canning the project. I couldn't keep the loop short. I couldn't engage with a journalist in a way that I can get the feedback to iterate quickly in order to make this viable. So technically it's easy. But I've never tried to do that as work in my life. So the point being is that the first thing that's really important is, in order to debug well, in order to iterate in a way that can get to something of value, the builder must be close to the pain. Right, so over the years, we've done hundreds of projects, software development projects. The projects that were the biggest successes were the ones where the software developers were close to the pain, they understood it well, they were subject matter experts, etc. The reality is, at that time, it wasn't that obvious because the feedback loops were long, right? We would, even in sprints, like a 2-week sprint is a long feedback loop. So with long feedback loops, we couldn't identify that that was actually the problem. But my journey with vibe coding and my journey with past experience in software development made me realize that the problem actually isn't, or to solve the problem is you need to get people working on things that they have proximity to, they're subject matter experts in order in a journey to become an expert. Now, when we say when customers pay, there's one thing that I often see when it comes to founders and very often with developers as well, they avoid the payment conversation, okay? Because the payment conversation is a vulnerable one, right? When I ask you to pay for a piece of software that I built, I'm like putting it all on the table, because if you say no, it can get quite personal, right? So, but there's a different way to think about this which actually helps you develop the project, your product. So firstly, when you don't charge, we've had the comic strip earlier, people say it's a great idea, but that's just polite noise, right? Anybody ever experience how awkward it is if you at a braai and someone says, I've got an app idea, and you just straight up go, that's the worst idea I've ever heard. You just met this person, I'm in someone's house, his mate comes over, oh, I hear you into apps, like I want to tell you my app idea. And now you just want to go, this is literally the worst thing I've ever heard in my life. No one does that, right? We all go, okay, yeah, that's really cool, man. That's really cool. And as I was thinking about this, I thought maybe this is not the right audience, because I know developers can be quite straight up and to the point, right? So maybe you guys don't appreciate it as much as I've experienced it. But the reality is, majority of people are too nice in social settings to tell you your idea sucks. Okay. Big problem, by the way, not the point of this, but big problem is AI also does this. Okay, so AI would tell you your stupid app idea is a great idea because they don't want you to cancel your subscription. Okay, so be careful of that. Okay, then a lot of people go, okay, but let's do a free trial. But free trials is often just fluff, right? People come and they never upgrade. Also, just South African context, the upgrade rate, the audience size you need in a free trial to get to a conversion rate that will actually be financially viable, in most cases it's not viable. So the free trial idea that comes from the United States comes from a place where there are 350 million consumers with disposable income and networks and ability to get into other countries to do a similar thing. So if you're building something in South Africa, you're talking about a substantially smaller market size. So, I mean, in most cases, you have to get every single potential person on your free trial just to get a 1% conversion to make the business viable. So free trials don't work. It's fluff. It doesn't work. What does work is actually convincing someone to pay for something. So if you're building your own idea, maybe you're side hustling, maybe you're doing something over the weekends, go out, convince someone to pay an amount for it, okay? And then something beautiful happens. If you pay for something, you are very likely to complain when that thing is not delivering on its promise, right? So if you buy something from, let's say you make it simple, you go to a retailer, you buy something, you buy some meat, you get home, you're ready to braai, you open it up, the meat's gone off, but the sell-by date says it's supposed to be fine. You'll go back and complain. Because you go, this is not what I thought I would get. And that's something magical that happens when you build a product and you get someone early on to pay for it. They're going to complain. And when they complain, that's feedback. And that feedback is useful for an iteration loop. Right? So don't be scared of charging people. Just deliver on the promise, even if it means you do it manually. Like if you do it manually, what does that mean? It means the tech couldn't actually do what the customer wanted. Can you do it? Can you do it by yourself? Can you concierge the service? There's a lot of ways you can do that. And I think that's a big trick, by the way, for anybody building earlier stage. It's like get them to pay a proper amount so that it means enough for them that they would complain. Complaints aren't bad. Always, complaints I've always used that opportunity to turn them into our biggest fans. Because you resolve their issue, the fact that they complain means they care. Worst thing that happens is someone pays and they never complain. And then stop paying eventually. Okay, so if a product is a bug, in the context that we're talking about, debug it like one. Okay, so the reason I'm making this bridge is I actually think that software developers are some of the people that are best positioned to build great businesses because they understand this debugging principle really well, right? Because building a product is no different to that. So when you debug, there's some basic steps. So first you isolate it. So typically anybody in the room that's done debugging, you would most likely isolate it and try and contain it to see what's happening in that part that you're working on. So you cut it, maybe you make a manual backend, maybe you spin something up, you do ugly test cases, you do whatever you can to isolate this one. The second one is you look for signal. You print statements, you look at variable amounts, you do all kinds of things to really see like what does the system tell you. Then you go into iterating fast. You don't try and debug 2,000 lines of code. You try and get it into smaller iterations so that you can actually see what's happening and that the interdependencies between things don't influence your decision making by giving you bad data. And then you test your assumptions. And if you apply this into building a product, you can do something very similar. Firstly, you cut scope. You cut it down to the basic part that would actually get a customer to commit to a payment. Second thing, you look for signal. What is signal in this case? Is someone saying yes? Is someone canceling? How they're using the app? How they're engaging with it? Then you iterate fast. Whenever you get responses, you do short little iterations. In short iterations, add new features. In short iterations, update and improve. And then finally, you test any assumptions. So as you see people interacting with it, the signal isn't always 100% what you think it is. There's always nuance into how people engage with products. So developers, I think, are very well positioned to do early stage product really well. Now, I mentioned earlier that AI changed this game, and it did for a reason that it's just allowing us to shorten the feedback loops. So in this comic strip, you can see the developer on May the 8th. There's a lot of energy. There's a lot of enthusiasm. There's a very simple task that needs to get done. But a little bit more than a month later, it's completely confused. No one knows what's going on. And the business people that come from clients just come back and they've pivoted. Okay. Now, the problem that I saw back in the day when we were building software is that we'll have a discussion with a client. We'll be super excited about what we're building. We'll take that enthusiasm over to a UX department, who would then get cracking on designing a most beautiful user interface and user experience. Pass it over the fence to the software developers. 2 weeks passed for the first sprint, but as these 2 weeks passed, we have other conversations with the client. So we learn new things. Okay? We get more feedback from the end user, and actually that changes the perspective. In fact, sometimes the client's boss walks in and says the priorities need to change and the features need to go in a different direction. And 2 weeks later, we come back and that iteration is a complete waste of time because so many things shifted. Now with AI, when you can build much faster than in the past, it's a superpower because instead of a 2-week sprint before we can come to, or a month before we can come to this point, as in this example, you can actually do that within a few days and not run that risk of outside stakeholders that doesn't have proximity to how you're building actually doing that. So it's a great advantage, but it does mean something. It does mean that the developer of the future needs to have context, and it needs to have proximity to the problem. Okay, so I think it's more important now than ever to have that. In the olden days, agencies, we had an agency, we didn't have to have context of the projects we're working on because we had capability. Capability was simply good enough. Someone said, I need a mobile app, I can't develop it myself. These guys have capability, let's use them. Okay, that's not the problem anymore. So you can't win on capability, you need to win on context. You need to understand what you are building. Right, and this kind of summarizes it. So Cody is our AI, represents anything AI in our comic strip. And this is the founder writing a job post-draft. Person needs to be able to do React, Node.js, AWS, etc. And then Cody replies, I can do most of those things. And he says, I know. And then he changes the job spec to what matters most. Must talk to customers, must understand the problem, must iterate to value. And he's like, oh, I can't do that. Does that make sense? That's how we beat AI, people. Not too much excitement about that. But we're all going to have jobs. Okay. So, let me take a sip of water. So, as I conclude, if you're a developer, you're wondering what all this means, here's 5 things that you can start Monday morning that's going to help you get better in this new era of product development. which is actually not a new era of product development. It's been the same always. It's just AI has really illuminated how much more important it is to build the right stuff and to iterate, and given us the means to do that. Okay, so firstly, get close to the problem. AI in general, what I think will believe, not only in software development industry, but across all industries, is going to help humans or force humans to get closer to their passions. Okay, so the world we're living in, we all understand, like sometimes you make a career choice that's maybe not 100% in line with what you're passionate about, but it's a good salary, you've got a family to look after. A long, different talk could be about how costs could potentially go down of goods in the future with all of this stuff. And when that happens, it's going to force us all to get closer to our passions because the amount what you earn will be less relevant. But let's have that conversation over lunch. So get close to the problem. Build where you love. Like, if you are considering becoming an entrepreneur, building your own product, the best advice I can give you is build something in the space that you love. If you look at the tool stack that a lot of developers use, or even the supporting tools that goes with it, it was typically built by people who worked in that industry. They understood it, they had a passion for making it better, and then they built a tool to solve their own problem, and that now becomes a mainstream tool that all of us uses. Atlassian is an example of that. Notion is another example of that. So build where you love, that which you know, that which you love, that which you're passionate about. If you can't do that, if you work for someone else, if you work on a project, then learn to love that which you're working on, right? And if that's not possible, if it's not possible for you to learn that, then start thinking about what is the area or the industry that you love so you can move into that space. Okay, so actually just this last point is important. If you can't build where you love, learn to love what you build. You can't debug what you don't understand. Proximity is the work. In the future, proximity, really understanding how something works, is the work of the future. It's not writing code. Okay, second one, make the loop deliberately small. So speed of learning compounds. Every time you do an iteration, it actually compounds into you being better and being able to the next iteration improve, right? But speed of shipping doesn't. So, I mean, if you just let things run for a long time, there's no learnings, and it actually becomes harder to actually get closer to the problems of users. I had a conversation with Malan Hubert recently, who some of you might know. Lots of respect for Malan. I love the fact that he's a developer that's just embraces entrepreneurial route and just solved it to a large degree. And Malan spoke at an event of ours, and he said, like, one of the worst things you can do as a first-time founder is to raise funding. And everybody was like taken aback and shocked because we all need funding to build things. And he said, but something that happens when you take funding and you're not experienced at deploying capital well, what will end up happening is you just increase your feedback loop cycle. So if I have runway for 12 months, I have no reason to deploy something next week, right? Because I've got 12 months to figure this out. But if I need to eat at the end of the month, if I need money by the end of the month, otherwise I'm not going to be able to survive, what am I going to do? I'm naturally going to slim down my project, naturally going to slim down what it does in order for me to get something into the market and sell it to someone so that I can get money to continue going. Does that make sense? So it's almost a good idea that if you're building something to intentionally not raise funding so you can keep your focus on making small, shorter feedback loops. Now, obviously all these things there's context to all of it. So it really depends on the situation. If you're building something deep tech, you might need funding. But generally speaking, SaaS products, something you can build, software you can build, it's actually a good idea to force yourself to ship sooner and do small iterations and do so by getting customers to pay early. Okay, so start with something deliberately small, smaller scope, uglier interface. This is lean startup stuff. So yeah. Third one, design around the payment test. Okay, what are users actually going to pay for? And like I mentioned earlier, payment represents the exchange of value. Someone going, wow, this is valuable. How can you simplify it to something where this is the part that you can sell? So, yeah, be confident in pricing, charge people, and then use complaints to iterate. And then the last two, debug until it works. Not when the sprint closes, when someone says, this is worth something to me. I used to hate it when we built software and the team would be happy because we built something, and I'm like, but it's not working for the customer. But they're like, it's perfect. There are no bugs. It's functioning. I'm like, but they're not getting any value from it. It's not useful commercially. So change your mindset to work to a point where it says, let's build something of value, something people would pay for. And then finally, solve problems. Don't just write code. Code is a tool. The job is much bigger. Proximity, passion for that industry, getting in there. Something you can do is if you're working in an industry, are you going to events in that industry? Are you reading newsletters? Are you following the right people? Are you making friends with people in that space? I think that's super important to get that context. And by the way, the reason why that's important is, as humans, and this is something which AI also can't do, it's really hard for me to explain everything I know. I don't know what I know, right? Because for me, it's just normal, right? So when we build something in a space that I have experience in, chances are I will contribute to how it should work based on knowledge I didn't even know I had, right? So we don't write down, I know this much about payments, and then people can draw, or AI can draw from that. We can't do that. We're not even aware of the things we've intuitively picked up over the years working in a specific industry. And that's something AI can't copy. So the more you build that repository up, the more you'll be better in actually helping build products that work because you have that context. Right, so this is an example of the thing I just spoke about, where building stuff that doesn't add value. So 100% test coverage, scales to 1 billion, 0 technical debt. What does it do? Don't really know. No users. Okay, so many people have been caught up in this trap where you build tech for the sake of building tech without really thinking about what is it going to do in the end. Okay, so to summarize, get close to the problem, create small loops, test for payment, debug it, iterate it till value, and solve problems. I think the future that we're in now, the biggest risk, the most risky developer isn't the one that builds faulty code. Okay, the most risk we have is someone that builds perfect code serving the wrong kind of assumptions. So building the wrong stuff, spending time, wasting resources, building things that won't be useful. All right, and then here's a little one to end with. I've analyzed your presentation. The thesis is writing code no longer has a job. That's right. Should I be concerned? Are you close to the problem? And then Cody's saying, I cannot feel pain. So we're going to be fine, everyone. Thank you. That's my talk. We've got about 7 minutes, so I'd welcome a question if anybody has a question. First question is always difficult. I should have planted one. Anybody building products at the moment? For yourself? Okay, quite a few. All right, if there are any questions, okay, we've got one question.
As you know, I have a birding app that runs a free trial, since it is an app for a very, very niche market. Would you still say a trial is a bad idea?
Okay, so all of these things depends. If the free trial is currently converting well, then I'd say it's fine. Generally, if you are not going to offer a free trial, then your positioning, how it looks like, the value that you present, which is much more a marketing and branding exercise, needs to do a lot of heavy lifting to get people over the line. And that's often work technical people avoid because that's actually quite complicated. Not too difficult, but it's a completely different way of thinking and going about things. But I'd lean that way, simply because being confident in the value that you're offering and not offering a free trial actually also brings a mindset to you and your team that helps you think on that level of money that you're charging people. So I think that's a good idea. And then also because it's a small audience, if you price it high and you can get a small subset of that to people who really get value from it, then often it's more sustainable than trying to charge less or trying to go free with a conversion. But it's case per case. Cool. Over there.
If someone does decide to go with a free trial, is there an optimal duration for the trial?
Oh, yeah, so that depends. So I think the free trials that work the best are those that kind of get you in and lock some value that you have into the platform. Because I'll give you an example. So Notion. I think most people in a room know Notion. So I started using Notion for free, and now I input data, I invite my wife, we have this board, we're planning a holiday, and then all of a sudden I go, hey, don't delete my stuff after 30 days. And then I have to pay, right? So those things make sense because there's a big moat for me to go off the free trial. It's the same with Xero. Like Xero accounting software at the moment, they're one of our partners, they're offering all our readers 90% off for 6 months, which is enormous, right? But they want a financial commitment, guys, even if it's small. But then as soon as I get my bank statements recon into Xero, the chances of me going off there is zero. So in those cases, it absolutely makes sense. But often people just give free trials, check it out, I get all the value for the app, and I'm not going to pay. So if it entrenches value, free trials are fine. If it doesn't, if it just shows you what it does, then I think payment up front is the way to go.
When do you think you should transition from being developers to hiring developers so one can sell the product, because most developers can't sell the product?
Okay, so I'm going to challenge that. I think most developers can sell the product. They're just not confident in selling it. Okay, so I actually think, I'm going to be honest, like the best entrepreneurs are actually developers. Because developers are smart, they're good with strategy, they're really creative with problem solving. Where they sometimes lack is confidence, and public speaking confidence, reaching out to people, speaking, telling them about it. And they need to grow in that. And I can say that founder-led sales is a non-negotiable up until a point where you can scale. Like, you cannot outsource sales to someone else if you've built the product. It's not going to work. Like, I've tried it myself because, believe it or not, like, I also sometimes don't like sales. Like, it is uncomfortable. But it's really getting comfortable with sales, figuring out how it works for you. Like, sales books are great, but they're also horrible because if you read a sales book and you feel like you need to be someone that's not you, then it didn't do its job. Like, sales is being you because people buy from people and they buy from people that they trust. So if you want to get better at sales, like, be more trustworthy, learn to connect with people, deliver on your promises, then those kind of things compound over years. It becomes easier and easier. So learn to do the sales, and for the start, as soon as you can replicate, as soon as you can build a box, where you can tell a salesperson, here's the box, go sell it, then it works. The other thing that's really important is in the early days of doing founder sales, you need to be able to pivot on the spot. And I'm not talking about big pivots, I'm talking about small pivots. Right, so I'll give you an example. When we first started building apps, we built iOS apps, and then, in a meeting with developers, one guy said he's really keen to do an Android app. Okay, and he's been playing around. He showed me something. I go into a meeting later with a prospective client. They go, "Cool, we want an iOS app, but we also want an Android app. So we're thinking about working with another company." Okay, so in that moment, I can go, "No, we can do an Android app." Okay, and then spin that up and start offering that as a service we do as well. That you do only in the early stages of a company, and as a founder, you often need to do it because we needed the income at the time, so it made sense to do it. But a salesperson can't make that call on the spot. They're going to go, this doesn't fit my rule book, so I can't commit to this. So founder-led sales until it's stable, until it scales, until you can build a box, and then you get salespeople in. Go. One at the back.
In terms of pricing, how would you define what the industry would be willing to pay?
Pricing. Pricing is difficult for me as well, but what I can tell you what I think is the right way to do, okay? And that is to not go cheap. Okay, but here's what happens, right? So you go expensive, what you think is expensive, even what they maybe think is expensive. And you pitch at a specific point, and I lost my train of thought. The problem is it gets difficult because now you pitch at a specific point and you get a no, right? And then I know how I go. My mind starts racing. Oh, there's only 5 of these people that I know that I can speak to. The first one was already said no. Maybe I should just go cheaper. Okay, that's not the problem to solve. The problem to solve here is a no isn't a permanent no. Okay, and you need to figure out how to iterate that thing to get it to a yes if you really believe it's going to add value to the person you're engaging with. Okay, I think one thing, and final thought, one thing that South Africans don't do, which Americans do brilliantly, they don't see selling as me doing you a disservice. They actually think me selling something to you is good for you. So I'm doing you a favor by selling you, right? Because my product's adding value to your life at a disproportionate rate to what you're paying versus what it's doing. And because I have that confidence, I can confidently walk in and go, hey, I want to talk to you about what I'm doing because it's going to add value to your life. And then it just changes the whole angle on how we do sales. So pricing is complicated, but rather go high, and that gives you the flexibility to always go down, but keep the relationship going. If you anchor too low, it's really hard to go up. Like if you want to charge a SaaS product 200 Rand a month or 500 Rand a month, but you anchor at 200, by the time you go to 500, it's going to be an awkward conversation. But if you anchor at 1,000, you discount to 500, that's a much easier conversation. So I hope that helps. Cool. Do one more.
Regarding free versions, in the South African context, is there value in giving a watered-down version for free?
Yeah. Generally in South Africa, I don't think it's a good idea. So, simply because the market is too small. Like I'll give you some context, like we did a newsletter and we did a paid-for version of that. It has deeper dives on stuff. Okay? In America, conversion from free trials to paid is typically 1 to 3% of them doing a good job. Okay? So if you have 50,000 free trial users and you get 1%, that is how many users? 500. 50 users. Sorry, it's not 1%, 0.1 to 0.3% is the conversion. So then they get 50 users. So now you need to ask the question, can you make enough money from 50 users to make this sustainable? And often in South Africa, the answer is not, because if you can get to 1 million, okay, and now you sell 0.1%, well, now it's interesting because now you have 1,000 customers. And if you charge 1,000 customers 1,000 Rand a month, now you have 1 million Rand a month. So it's just looking at it. The conversion is super low. Even in America, South Africa even worse. Like, just check News24, like, no one signs up to that subscription. So, anyway, okay, thank you everyone. Lovely to meet you.